I should perhaps begin by stressing that the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, my own organization, has been extremely concerned about ongoing systematic patterns of violations and abuses in Venezuela, which really indicate a policy that is authorized at the highest level of government, and which is precisely what the fact-finding mission has just concluded as well, that these patterns actually may amount to crimes against humanity. And I think what's worst in all of that, and this is something Valentina has mentioned just now, is that the almost full impunity on a domestic level actually emboldens perpetrators to continue to commit these crimes. It emboldens ongoing targeted persecution and repression. And this impunity over a very, very long period of time has actually created, and it has perpetuated, an environment which is extremely conducive to atrocity crimes. So this is why today, exactly a year ago, all of us on this panel and many, many other defenders and organizations have been calling on the Human Rights Council to establish an independent investigation into these crimes and into these violations and abuses. And we really applaud the decision by a group of countries and members of the Lima Group to actually take leadership and to show vision. And to push the Human Rights Council to adopt the resolution which establishes the mechanism which is now the fact-finding mission. And I should perhaps emphasize that mobilizing support for the creation of such an investigative mechanism requires significant political will of UN member states. This also applies for mandate renewals, which is what we're facing this year. So I think it's really important to stress the importance of that decision and of the establishment of that mechanism, because it really shows one thing, which is that the Human Rights Council as a mechanism can and it should be used to respond to ongoing atrocity crimes. And it can, in fact, be in certain situations also more effective than other mechanisms. And in the case of Venezuela, I'm of course specifically referring to, for example, the UN Security Council. One last thing I think that this decision last year has shown is that the Human Rights Council as a mechanism can be mobilized by almost an entire region to actually mobilize action to respond through such a mechanism to a crisis that is unfolding on its own continent. But perhaps to come back to today, the fact-finding mission has concluded their mandate, the first year of their mandate. They have released the report. We have seen the findings. I really believe, as everyone else has expressed today, that they are historic, remarkable, so precise and clear in findings, in language. But I think the question now is, what happens next? What are we going to do with these findings, right? And so let me perhaps briefly touch upon the role of investigative mechanisms in general, because they do and they can play a significant role in identifying root causes of atrocity crimes. And by doing so, they can actually outline necessary structural reforms which have to take place on a national level. And this is precisely what the fact-finding mission did. So in an ideal scenario, of course, you would want the government concerned to actually address these recommendations and use this information to contribute to political change on a domestic level to address these risk factors. I think we're all very much aware that, unfortunately, in the case of Venezuela, there is very, very little prospect, to say the least, that the current government in the imminent future is going to consider these recommendations, let alone implement any of them. Their message has been very clear. They reject the fact-finding mission. They reject the findings. There's absolutely zero recognition of their role in the commission of atrocity crimes. And I think this is where investigative mechanisms, and in this case, the fact-finding mission for Venezuela, this is where they really should inspire individual and collective action by the international community to uphold their responsibility to protect and to actually respond and send a signal to the government, increase pressure on the government and say, we know what you're doing and we're not going to stay silent. And the toolbox of action, I should say, is very broad. There's a lot of different ways in which you can respond. I mean, targeted sanctions is one. Different accountability processes are one. Universal jurisdiction, other mechanisms. And as Marta Valinas has mentioned, it goes way beyond legal accountability. But I think, you know, saying all of this about the role of investigative mechanisms and the potential impact they can have. And we have seen this with the fact-finding mission on Myanmar. We have seen this with the COI on North Korea. We see the work that comes out from the COI on Burundi, on South Sudan. These are mechanisms that collect incredible amounts of information and evidence. I think what it comes back to, and this is perhaps my final point in wrapping up, despite, I would say, a proliferation of HRC mandated investigative mechanisms, we have seen many of these mechanisms being created over the past years. The establishment of such a mechanism shouldn't be confused with political will to respond to atrocities, unless the findings and these investigations that are done by these mechanisms actually result in follow-up action on an international level, on a regional level, and on a national level. So this is really, I think, my key message. It has to result in follow-up action to ensure accountability, to foster reconciliation, and to actually facilitate non-recurrence. So the findings, now that the report is out, all this information that we now have in writing by a UN investigative mechanism, this needs to be the beginning and not the end, because the report sends a very clear message to perpetrators, to victims, to their families, but also to the Human Rights Council, which is investigations must continue, and now is not the time to look away. I'll stop here, but thanks so much, and